Please welcome to the stage our speakers. We have Reuben Godfrey from the Blockchain Association of Ireland. Then we have Benjamin Buergi from Liechtenstein's Financial Market Authority. Michael Mosimann, who's a senior associate at the Zug-based law firm Wenger & Wiely. Kevin van der Veer, an entrepreneur who co-founded the Dutch blockchain network. And then Assylbek Davletov, who leads financial technology efforts at Kazakhstan's Astana Financial Services Authority. All right. So I'd like to start off by asking our regulators here about the opinions on cryptocurrencies in their jurisdictions. How do you classify these? Are these securities? Are we dealing with commodities? What do we have?
Shall I start first? Thank you. So first, I think we have to understand what the cryptocurrency is. And there are some definitions are given by some jurisdictions and especially by FATF. There was a report in 2015, I believe, which clearly defines what is the cryptocurrency, what is the virtual currency, what is the e-money, and what other types of tokens. So when, with the emergence of Bitcoin and the blockchain, nothing changed dramatically, I would say. So we had only new forms of payments, currency, but in other way, the financial instruments remain the same. They just changed the form. It became a tokenized. So if the tokens issued by the company has a goal to attract the investments, they will be a financial instrument and will be securities and shall be regulated as under the Securities Act or law. Yes, but we have to clearly identify what the utility token is and what the security token is. I think this is the way how the regulators should treat cryptocurrencies.
And what about in Liechtenstein?
In Liechtenstein, it's basically the same, and I'm very happy that you raised that issue that when we talk about cryptocurrencies, what we actually mean is a whole lot of different things. And a security that is issued on token basis, if you kind of tokenize your shares, that doesn't mean that it's not a security. It's still a security, and securities law apply. And the question I think is most essential there is where do we draw the line between financial market law and what is actually security? For instance, the SEC has quite a broad definition, or they apply almost anything is a security in the US, whereas in Switzerland or in Liechtenstein, as in the EU generally, I think we have a bit differentiated or a more differentiated view on that. But I think it raises the fundamental question where to draw this line. But I totally agree, and I think this line has to be found individually. I can just say in Liechtenstein, basically, cryptocurrencies, if you talk about kind of the payment or utility token, whatever that means, or where the definition of that is considered to be a commodity, more or less.
Okay.
Just, you mentioned Liechtenstein, Switzerland. At least they've actually come out and had a position on what cryptocurrencies are, or at least being open and inviting conversation and debate. In Ireland, I was told off the record by the central bank but you're all friends, so it's fine. But they're saying it may as well be fish farming for all they care. It doesn't fall within what they consider to be money. And I find that a really unhelpful attitude for a central bank to take. So evidence of that, I guess that Liechtenstein and Switzerland and Malta and Gibraltar and all these other places that are taking an active role in defining what this will be are the places that are benefiting most in attracting the investment and getting the innovation. And I'm in the embarrassing situation of having to set up in Estonia as head of the Blockchain Association of Ireland in order to try and be compliant. So this is interesting, sort of the people who are acting first, even if you don't have a fully made or a fully cogent or a fully decided position, at least it's better than nothing. I think that's important.
So what does that effectively mean in Ireland? So you mentioned having to set up in Estonia. Does that sort of mean it's a standstill at the moment?
No, things are happening. I mean, I guess in Ireland we've gained a lot of notoriety recently, very recently, for our kind of flexible attitude towards tax and regulation, if the money's right, you know. So with tech companies, so it's not like we're not open-minded to kind of listen, but it's I think we're too much in. There's a few moving parts. Obviously, Brexit's pretty big for us, and yeah, we still follow a lot. We're still very much after 2008 under the thumb of the European Central Bank, so we can't go rogue just yet. But we're still on. We're still there. We're still. I think we're in good direction, but ECB really pulls the strings there still.
Now, Michael, from your perspective as a lawyer, do you want to tell us a little bit about Swiss regulation, how it's changed over the past year and what that's meant for your clients?
Sure, happy to do so. Thanks for having me here on the panel. So first of all, before going into too much technical details of Swiss financial market regulations, a few basic principles. That first of all, Switzerland does not, it has never had and still has not a blockchain specific regulation. What Switzerland still has is the traditional financial market regulations, and FINMA has shown that it will apply a principle of substance over form. So it will look at each individual token or cryptocurrency that has been issued or is to be issued, and will then qualify whether it, depending on what rights are associated with that token, what features are represented therein, will then apply the relevant laws. So some cryptocurrencies probably qualify. It just recently published a new guidance where it finally implemented 3 different classes, one being the payment tokens, qualified as means of payment, which is a good thing for Switzerland because means of payment does not qualify as security. We have, on the other hand, utility tokens, and we have security tokens. Now, what it did not do is provide any clearer distinction between the 3 classes. It also said it could be hybrid tokens. So, for example, you could easily link a utility token to a payment token. And if you have a utility token that grants access to a system, the borderline to a payment token is very small, especially in situations where you say, for example, you're a service provider, you issue a token, and then you accept these tokens as own mean of payment for providing these services. FINMA has at least offered the opportunity to look at each individual token up front and provide a statement on that. You can apply for a no action letter and all that stuff. But yeah, it's from my perspective, it's a reasonable approach.
Okay. And now you mentioned the challenges for projects if they are classified as a security. What's so difficult about securities regulations? Why is this a topic that a lot of the cryptocurrency community has been a little bit afraid of?
It's probably a problem that comes from the US. Everyone is afraid of being a security in the US. Under Swiss law, I as a lawyer would even say you have quite some benefits to be a security. because on the Swiss law, current Swiss law only has a prospectus requirements if you issue shares or bonds and nothing else. Now, if you have a security token that is neither a share nor a bond, you're not to do a prospectus requirements. Also, FINMA guidance has made it clear that the AML regulations do not apply to the issuance of security tokens. So, from a Swiss legal perspective, it's actually beneficial to have a security token. The problem is, it's not only the jurisdiction of the place where you're based that applies, but also every single jurisdiction in which you publicly offer the token for sale. So even if you qualify as security here in Switzerland, which could be beneficial under Swiss law, if you then offer it in the US, you're still a security, and then it's much more cumbersome.
Okay. Now, Kevin, as an entrepreneur and member of the Dutch blockchain network, how do you see the kind of benefits and threats from regulation?
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I'm not a regulator, but I know a bit how it works in the Netherlands, and regulators there struggle a bit because blockchain is cross-border. So they say basically, yeah, well, we can do something, but it's cross-border, so we cannot have like Dutch law or something on it. And also they are part of EU, so that's I think also with Ireland the case. Yeah, so that's the hassle over there. Yeah.
Okay. Now, kind of a question for everybody. You know, you've mentioned the difficulties of how cryptocurrencies are viewed between jurisdictions, cross-border issues. Do you see a need for kind of a global consensus on regulation? If so, how should national entities and international entities be working together?
I don't think so at all. I think everyone should be allowed to do what they want, really. I mean, that's. Well, that's my opinion. Absolutely not. I'm really reluctant, even for the Blockchain Association of Ireland, to start being part of some bigger network. You know what I mean? I don't think it's necessary. If you start kind of thinking about some framework you must fit into, then you can't really innovate freely. You know, so I think that's the antithesis of what we should be going for, really. Like.
Okay.
I think there might be very interesting questions surrounding tokens and the entire blockchain environment that probably need a wider solution. So, for example, let's simply start with a question: what legal qualification would you give to a smart contract? It's a new thing that has been developed to be self-executing. It simply exists out there. It manages its own funds that are deposited in that smart contract. So in the traditional legal manner, we have individuals and legal entities as legal subjects. Now, what is a smart contract? That's probably not really a national question of law, but that would be one of the really interesting questions that could be solved on a broader general basis. And then also following from that, where do you sue, for example, a smart contract? Can you sue it at all? And if yes, where and what jurisdiction applies? That's one of the questions, some of the questions that follow from the entire blockchain industry.
Sorry, just one other, I guess I should qualify, but I found also, I'm involved in that ISO TC307 blockchain standardization, or blockchain and TLT standardization group within Ireland. Now, it's a global thing, obviously global initiative, but I've seen loads of good energy and very little output. You know, you have all these great minds, and I think they're better. I don't know if I could see them kind of, if they were putting their minds to other work, it would be so stagnant, very slow moving. I think by the time they get the regulation actually standardized or some sort of idea, we'll already be past what, you know, the point of the whole thing. So I think it's kind of wasted energy.
I guess following up on that, given all these cross-border issues, right? So, I mean, you probably don't want to be establishing a blockchain or a cryptocurrency that's just going to be used within one jurisdiction, right? Like, you don't want to say, I'm going to leave out any sort of user who's outside Estonia or Ireland or wherever, what do you think the best approach is?
Sorry. I don't know. I don't know.
So I mean, the public offering of the token is the one thing. What happens with the token thereafter is another thing. The securities regulation and all these kind of regulations particularly apply to the public offering of things. If thereafter people start selling privately their tokens to a user in another country, that's a completely different question. That is completely free from the securities regulation. The only regulation that could apply there would be probably security trading. But then it again depends on several other questions.
Yeah. So what happens in Switzerland once a token hits an exchange?
I mean, we usually advise our clients that if it is a security token, it should be listed on a regulated trading venue. For the time being, there are hardly any trading venues. There is a company based here in Switzerland, Liechtensteins, that has got the security trader license in Vanuatu, no matter where that is. And this, I think it's also currently applying for the Swiss permission, but hasn't received that yet.
Now, Kevin, before the panel, one of the issues we were discussing is privacy laws in the EU. Can you mention how this is?
It symbolizes a bit that regulators are obviously slow. So the GDPR, that was like they started to make it in 1995. It's now finished, but if you take blockchain into it, makes no sense anymore. So that's symbolize a bit the. Yeah.
This is hilarious for anyone that doesn't know. There's this thing called the right to be forgotten, and
it's impossible in blockchain.
It's impossible. Yeah. It's like one of the strongest features of the kind of positives of blockchain is immutability. Yeah. Suddenly GDPR makes that its biggest drawback, its biggest flaw, and. I don't know if there's a way to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This is also something I noticed in one of the projects I just recently got for review. They wanted to create, that's one of the projects that wanted to create a social media platform. And one thing they advertised is that posts will be removed and they won't be apparent anymore. And I was reading that stuff and I thought, you're talking about a blockchain-based social media platform. Are you sure you know what you're talking about?
With the emergence of blockchain and the cryptocurrencies, what we see the trend of disintermediation. So when the role of middleman of operator is going down, and this creates big challenges for the regulators, for us. And we are looking for a person, who can be a legal entity or individual person, to impose these requirements on anti-money laundering, on KYC or other types of requirements, even data protection. So today's one of the biggest issues and challenges for the regulators it's anti-money laundering KYC, as well as personal data protection issues. And so, as colleagues already mentioned, in Europe, they are just adopting a legislation which is already obsolete, outdated. So this happens, and we see that the technology is always one step ahead of regulators. And these new disruptive, let's say, products and services, they're not only disrupting incumbent financial institutions, but also financial regulators. Yes.
So, Benjamin, when you're looking in Liechtenstein at an ICO, what are kind of some of the risks? What are the questions you're asking? What could result in a violation? What does a group need to do to be compliant?
Well, first of all, we have to look at the different licenses that we, or as a financial market regulator, actually have to supervise. So is it the bank? Is what they're doing, what their business model intends to do, is it, do they take in deposits? Do they trade in securities? But this always goes back to the financial market law and the definition of all these activities that are regulated by law. And we, of course, look at, could something that they do qualify as something that we have to supervise and that you would need a license for? So that's basically what we see. But, that's kind of the narrower approach, of course. But because we also have to kind of look at the whole thing and the whole ecosystem that comes with it. I mean, we look at technology risk, we look at reputational risks that do not directly affect us as a regulator, as a financial market regulator, but of course we have to keep in mind when looking at those business models. And we, to some extent, also try to highlight on issues within the business model, within the white papers, to the clients that come to us. We call them clients, to kind of provide guidance. But basically, what we do is just supervising the banking regulation and the financial market regulation. So there is not much we can do, because I maybe have to clarify that the regulator is not the one that makes the law. That would be the governmental bodies or the democratically legitimized entities within a state that actually do that. So we just enforce the law. So we have to interpret the law and apply the law, but we don't make the law, basically.
I mean, if I may, I would like to emphasize one point Ben has rightfully pointed out. It doesn't stop with the token qualification. It moves on to the business model qualification. Regardless of what your token is, if you're, for example, accepting funds and guarantee the repayment of funds if the token buyer redeems his token, then that's actually a public deposit-taking activity which requires a banking license. And regardless of what your token is, you could qualify as a bank. There are some other business models, for example, insurance businesses that are regulated here in Switzerland, requires a particular corporate form, and you need to be supervised by FINMA. Yeah, it's not only the token itself, but also the entire business model.
Okay.
And I think the approach from the market has completely changed, because a few years back, someone came to you with a big dossier and they said, well, we want a banking license, that's our request. And now they come with a business model and ask, what are we? So this kind of needs a mindset particularly strange for a regulator or a lawyer working for a regulator, because you just have your drawings, your drawers, and you put something in that drawer and something in another, and suddenly something completely new comes, and you have to kind of arrange yourself and completely change your thinking. And I'm not one of the long-term employees of the FMI, meaning that maybe I'm not yet too much in this system. So I try to keep my openness and kind of keep my approach. But basically, it's an approach you need for every fintech model or evaluation for a fintech business model. And I think that's something that might have changed during the whole fintech disruption and chain emergence.
So Assylbek, what's your opinion on how do you go about as a regulator, making sure you're doing your job, maintaining stability, security, but also not taking so much time that you're stifling innovation?
Sure. One of the challenges for the regulators is also keeping the balance of over-regulation and light regulation. So at this stage, what we see is that the cryptocurrencies, the tokens, they used to finance small, medium-sized enterprises, which is good. So I would say it's the next generation of crowdfunding. So, and instead of creating new types of like tokens, I mean the names or whatever types, I think regulators should focus on creation of new regimes, so which would allow new enterprises to grow faster and to increase the number of these SMEs. I think this is the focus, and as always, one of the tasks for the regulators is consumer protection. So we have to first look how we can protect the consumers, and the positions that taken by some central banks, some financial regulators, just to issue some kind of notes and notices to inform consumers about the risks associated with the investment in tokens or in cryptocurrencies shall be considered as a temporary measure. But regulators shouldn't ignore the existence of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but proactively should collaborate with other jurisdictions and learn, and also work with the entrepreneurs and develop more favorable regulatory frameworks.
So Kevin, Reuben, I guess coming from the blockchain side of things, what do you feel like blockchain projects should be doing in terms of best practice? Should they be doing AML work? What sort of white papers should projects be putting out? And in an ideal world, how would regulators be working with you guys?
I guess there's the question between, that's more about the fundraising for me, I think, than the technology itself, right? I mean, most of the questions around compliance and around regulation are about the fundraising. Honestly, if people weren't raising tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in public crowdfunding, nobody would really mind about, I don't think there'd be as much of a, but that's obviously, it's obviously a huge question. I mean, I don't know, blockchain, I mean, the best looking projects, I mean, I'm obviously involved in many ICOs as an external advisor. The projects that are kind of most attractive and are the ones that have at least sort of future-proofed or thought that this might be what's coming down the road. I was involved at one US-based with a gambling site that actually managed to do everything compliant, and they raised in the US and everything, you know. So it can be done. It's not like it's impossible. That was called Ether Sports for anyone that's interested. It was really interesting, and they looked down the track and they were predicting what sort of questions and problems they might run into, and they spoke about it all up front. Literally the first 2 pages, or there was, I don't know if it was at the very start and at the very end, all these provisos and caveats about, like, don't invest. Pretty much don't invest in this unless you're, you know, willing to lose, you know, all these things. So I think absolutely the people who at least have tried to predict as much of what might come are the most attractive projects for me to get involved in. If there's absolutely no consideration for that, it's wild. I won't get involved in any project that looks reckless, and that's the one bit of advice I give them as I politely decline them.
Yeah, I also did that. Like, I get lots of requests from projects that are very unclear what they actually do. They want to raise millions of dollars, but you don't know what actually. And that's a bad thing, and yeah, regulators cannot really stop that, I think. Well, they can do something, but if you take, for example, the Pirate Bay, in the Netherlands it's forbidden, but it's still in there. Like, it's still, you can reach it because it's the internet. So that's the difficult part of the internet. I mean, you can be North Korea, but that's not what we want to be, I guess. Then you can control everything, but for example, the Pirate Bay, it's in the Netherlands, it's forbidden. So the internet providers, they have to close them down, cost them lots of money, but you can still reach the Pirate Bay with proxies. So But in terms of ICOs, I think there are good projects, but there are also lots of scams and bad projects. Yeah.
But there are also the projects that really keen to do an ICO and kind of fit blockchain into it somehow, you know. So it's blockchain's the afterthought. Blockchain
is a marketing term at this moment. It's lots of times it's not really useful to use blockchain actually, but they think, okay, now is the market, and investors think they're going to earn lots of money. But in 2 years, 99% of them are not there anymore, I think.
Part of my qualification, I guess, or my assessment process with white papers and projects is to look at this, well, is there any way that this could happen without blockchain? And if there is, then it's probably not a good project. Yeah, it has to be, because this is the absolutely essential part of this business model is to use blockchain, then an ICO might make sense.
If I may, the funny part about that is if you come with a business model that has somewhere blockchain written on it to the regulator, I'm part of the fintech team, so we are kind of open and aware of what it is. If you get to a more, let's say, conservative lawyer, every red flag is up if there is blockchain written on it, even though it doesn't have actually something to do with blockchain as such, or with the risks associated with cryptocurrencies in general. It's kind of a trigger as well as it is a marketing tool, obviously.
But there are also like good things happening with it. For example, the Dutch government, they do pilots with blockchain. And they do not say, okay, we have to use this technology. They just say to the industry, to universities, to companies, to developers, hey, let's try to improve this process within the government. And that they do good things with it. And then they know the technology, and then from there they can improve, I think. So
the Dutch government, I believe you still have a blockchain ambassador, right? So there is somebody.
We have a blockchain team, and if you go to blockchainpilots.nl, they showcase all those kinds of projects. Yeah.
It's really cool. I just thought I met Marlowe's Pomp over in Dubai. She's really
exactly.
Cool. And she's not of crypto, or she's not of, but she's coming into it with asking all the right questions. And I think that's the way people should be. And I love that attitude that the Dutch government are willing to do that.
Yeah, it's also the way how I think the Dutch government get to know with the technology. You can simply say, okay, we're going to ban it, or we're going to make regulation, but you have to know the technology, right? You have to understand and make projects with it. I think that's a good practice. This will work for other countries also, but I'm not sure if other countries are doing this. From what I heard, it's pretty unique that the government facilitates blockchain pilots to improve processes within the government. So like just as simple as asking for a wheelchair, that process, they did a pilot to improve that process in terms of efficiency. And that was kind of a successful pilot. And they do not say, as I said, hey, we're going to use this platform, this blockchain platform. They just try out everything and then see how it goes. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think as a presenter said earlier this morning, you know, especially when you look at both regulation and kind of government reaction to blockchain and cryptocurrencies, we've had kind of these two divergent opinions. You know, kind of the one approach of saying we're going to shut this down, this is something dangerous, versus the approach of saying this is something, you know, we really want to embrace. We want to see where this will go.
I think most countries are actually pretty much sitting on their hands and waiting for somebody to either have a spectacular success or a spectacular failure, and then kind of wait and kind of, you know, then maybe say something. But most places are doing nothing. That's my experience.
I think they do a lot, but they don't really publish it. Maybe. So behind the scenes, there was also a hearing in the Netherlands, a public hearing, a kind of debate with professionals and institutions, and like the Authority of Financial Markets and the Dutch Central Bank, they just say, okay, it's not within our jurisdiction, but behind scenes, of course, they do research and pilots also. Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to really have a statement, I guess, to say, okay, we are supporting it, because then maybe there are lots of political reasons for that also, like also within the EU. The Netherlands can say, okay, we want to embrace cryptocurrency, but I'm not sure if the European Central Bank is happy with that. So I think it's not that simple to say, hey, they don't do anything.
I am oversimplifying. I guess my point on it is I think that we're, a lot of these people who are in the positions that they can make a decision or could change things have been working all their career to get to that position, and then blockchain comes along, and I kind of get the feeling it's a not on my watch, you know. So I think we're one retirement round away from mass adoption or mass sort of. I think that people who come into those jobs next must have done some thinking on it. So.
Well, one of Switzerland's federal councillors made news actually at another crypto conference earlier this year, saying Switzerland wants to become the crypto nation. So I think we have seen jurisdictions that, whether it's through government work itself or trying to, work with regulation, sandbox regulation, or various kind of associations, are trying to do something to foster growth. Benjamin, I understand Liechtenstein, since kind of late last year, has been making itself more visible as a country that wants to become a potential next hub for cryptocurrencies. What are the policies you guys are implementing to encourage growth?
It's the same as Switzerland. We do not have a specific blockchain regulation or something like that. There is actually something in the pipeline, but that kind of also includes blockchain, but it's not blockchain specific. But generally, of course, the message from the government is to be open to innovation and to allow innovation, and we try to do that as good as possible within the legal framework that we have to work with. One of the great advantages of Liechtenstein is that they are quite nimble and flexible, and they have short ways of communications, meaning that they are able to adjust law or the legal framework more flexibly than maybe other bigger countries. So yeah, we have the mandate to kind of foster innovation and allow it, but on the other hand, of course, we have the mandate to enforce financial market law. So it's kind of a balance act.
Okay.
So I mean, in terms of Switzerland, at least the Federal Council initiated now a task force in order to get an understanding on where we need further regulation or new legislation. For example, the transfer of tokens, how does that need to be covered? But besides that, I think neither the canton nor the federal government has ever been a particular fan of some cluster politics. So for example, the canton of Zurich has become the crypto valley, but it has never been the cantonal government that actually promoted that. It simply has enabled the entire environment. Of course, the city of Zug was the first government to say, we're going to accept bitcoins. You still cannot pay taxes with bitcoins, but some other fees. That's at least something that shows we embrace the system. We want to enable it. We want to understand it. We're not going to ban it. We're going to live with it, but we are making sure that the existing regulations are applied and respected.
Also, the Dutch Minister of Finance, he also said there's no intention to ban it, but he wants to have some form of regulation. And it's, I think, also a good question for all of us here, like, is regulation needed? And maybe we can do also self-regulation within the industry as much as possible. But there are also bad things happening in this industry. For example, well, the downside of all the benefits, like you have lots of benefits, but also downsides, is a friend of mine yesterday lost 2 Ethereum by going into a scam site and, yeah, not aware of what was happening. And if that happens with a bank, the bank can help you. So that's the, if you got scammed by online, and then a bank can help you. That well, that's kind of the downside of that world, because no one can help her. That's the question of like how can we make this industry together with all of us better, like by self-regulation, by supporting initiatives, good initiative instead of not good initiatives, obviously. But I think governments won't ban it. Like, I mean, the Dutch government won't ban it, for example, but they will come up with some form of regulation. And I think it also makes sense because the internet is so fast. You cannot really control it. You just have to deal with it as good as possible and allow innovation.
Okay. Right, so maybe one last question before opening this up to the audience. Given everything we've discussed so far, what country do you guys think is doing this best? Like, what is kind of the best case scenario of regulation done well for blockchain?
Yeah, most probably Asana will be this year one of the leading countries. So it's not the advertisement. We are currently working, we are studying the ways how to regulate and what to regulate and when to regulate. And in this process, we are studying different jurisdictions. There are a couple of benchmarks. For example, New York was one of the first countries to adopt the BIT license, and we see the benefits of it. So the second country which legalized, I would say, the currencies and the crypto exchanges, it's the Philippines, as well as Japan. So we are in close collaborations with those countries. But we have to understand ignoring is one, banning is, second way of dealing with regulation, and third one is being proactive and providing some light regimes. So for the regulators, putting their stamp is very difficult. It's very hard. So when you are on a private sector, it's easier to blame or it's easier to comment on any actions taken by the regulators. But when you shift to the regulator side, you start understanding the full, let's say, responsibilities that you are taking on behalf of the government to provide this. That's why the regulators are not rush in developing and approving regulations. Okay.
Reuben, you want to give a quick thought?
I think there's no one-stop shop. There is no kind of best solution. There is no one-size-fits-all. The only thing that ties ICOs together is the means of fund gathering, basically, of raising funds. You mentioned Liechtensteins with Vanuatu. Scratch the surface of any successful ICO and you might be surprised about how many different jurisdictions are actually involved. So there's no one-stop shop, and there's so many political and traditional economic reasons for people to choose Ireland over Switzerland, EU versus English, for example, or Kazakhstan, for example, or the Netherlands. So there's many different reasons. I don't think there is one best fit for everything. There is no one-size-fits-all in this.
All right, thanks. Maybe something quick before we go to audience questions?
Well, I just wanted to say, like, that's who.
Hello, and thank you for this discussion. I'm Vincent Rouge from tokenestate.io. What is really interesting and about the current regulatory environment is that, if my understanding is correct, any foreign company can come to Switzerland and issue its own crypto security and sell it on a cross-border basis all over the world, right? And even if it's not sold all over the world during the initial ICO, as you pointed out, Mr. Mosimann, it can be sold privately thereafter. Isn't such a possibility much cheaper than an IPO? And shouldn't we expect a wave of company to come to Switzerland precisely to do this, because that will be the cheaper opportunity to be, quote, public? Thank you.
There's probably a practical reason for that. I don't think that there are sufficient crypto funds available within Switzerland that you limit your ICO to Switzerland only.
But yeah, the answer, I mean, there is a wave of companies that are coming here to do that. That is what's happened, right?
Yeah, there is a reason. I mean, but that's I don't know whether that is the really true reason. We got so many requests from US companies coming to us. Yeah, well, our US lawyer told us that it's going to be a problem in the US. Go to Switzerland, there is a much friendlier regulation. So many companies come to Switzerland based on such a piece of advice that I don't know from where that advice comes from. But at least we have our regulations here that needs to be applied. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Sorry, I think we're almost out of time. We've got one more question at the back over there. This.
Hi, thank you very much for the discussion too. Enrique Hablutzel from Impact Hub. And so it's a very open question about what is happening in Switzerland in terms of this openness to the blockchain and the cryptocurrencies. How do you see the social impact that this can bring for the nation? And it's, yeah.
Anyone want to take that?
So I mean, I'm a really big fan of impact investing and all that, and I still think the blockchain really has the potential. The technology itself has the potential to solve some of nowadays problems, or at least serve as a tool to help solve these kind of problems. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Switzerland is not really rushing into any regulation. Also, we Swiss people do not really have the reputation in the world to be the fastest regulators. We usually look at it for quite some time, make up our mind, have a long political discussion about everything, and then finally we get the regulation. Until we are there, it's still the financial market laws and all other laws in Switzerland that would apply. And even if someone comes to Switzerland that is not based in Switzerland, but offers the token for sale in Switzerland, FINMA would have a look at it.
All right. Well, I think that's our time.
Well, thank you very, very good and very interesting to see all the various approaches. Especially I find the Swiss approach very interesting. Great that FINMA has a regulation. Great that Mr. Schneider-Ammann is so, wants this to be the crypto nation. But when you speak to the central bank, they look at it slightly differently. But that's always interesting. But thank you very much. You moderated, Brenna. You moderated admirably, and you all were brilliant. Can you please all give them a really big hand?